I feel that so much of what we're talking about is related to how we connect our body with our soul. And when the girls had to go to the temple, they had to become bears, they had to experience it. And we should come up with all of our own ways of asking our bodies to engage with these places, like lighting candles, drinking wild water and filtering the holy water, and lying down on the ground, like meditating, looking up at the sky, foraging for the herbs. There's such a rich part of everything we're talking about. You have to be in the place. It's about the place, and it's about your body, and then connecting with your soul. And I think it's great that we're ending with someone who's literally just got off the plane back from Santiago. She arrived, I think, like 10 minutes ago, so I think incredible. And here is someone who actually basically adventures and goes around the place all the time. And I first met her 5 or 6 years ago, and at one of our first ever pilgrimages, guided ones, and she was very much looking at it from the lens of a journalist, just kind of doing a job, but interested and kind of intrigued by it. And over time, I can see this change. And then this book came out, and I read it, and I just realized that she's starting to sing out her soul. And everyone, Phoebe Smith.
Thank you, those of you who are still here. I know I've come in right at the end and everyone's got trains to catch. So, yes, I am Phoebe Smith, and I have just got off the plane from Santiago de Compostela. I've just walked the Camino Portuguese from Tui, taken in the Espiritual Variante, so the bit that has the boat trip, which is supposed to have followed the way the boat actually brought the body of St. James to Galicia. And as Guy said, I am an adventurer. I am a travel writer and broadcaster and podcaster, and done a lot of quite epic things. I've walked solo from the ice cap to the ocean in Greenland. I've wild camped and walked the entire length of mainland Britain, over 1,178 kilometers in winter, pulling everything in a sled. I've slept inside a glacier up at the last stop before the North Pole in the island of Svalbard. And I've extreme slept my way, dangling from skyscrapers and football stadiums and even inside a church on portaledges. And I'm telling you this so that you know I'm no stranger to hardship and hard work and a long walk. And then something happened to me back in 2016, and I walked the Camino de Santiago on the French way, the Camino Frances. And it changed my life, but not in the way that it's supposed to change your life. And I just want to read you something from my book, Wayfarer, so you can kind of hear the space I was at when I began on this journey. They say the Botafumeiro flies through the air in between the arches of Santiago Cathedral at speeds of over 42 miles per hour. I watched as this huge golden vessel, just a few inches shorter than I am tall, swooped above my head, expelling the sweet scent of frankincense in plumes of smoke, while the melodious notes of a lone nun singing Hymn to the Apostle punctuated its oscillations. For most pilgrims, this moment, after walking Spain's Camino de Santiago, is the culmination of weeks, if not months, of hiking and soul-searching. It's a sign that a great voyage to find yourself, your deity, your own way in the world has finally come to an end. It is markedly joyous, whereby the pilgrim has completed something truly fulfilling, a kind of full stop at the end of a particularly satisfactory sentence. And yet for me, it wasn't any of these things. As I watched the giant gold censer soaring through the air, I felt nauseous. Around me, pilgrims gasped in awe as the spectacle played out, while I remained silent. When it slowed to a pendulous steady swing and was recaptured by the Tirabularios, whose job it is to control its journey through the confines of the cathedral, I felt empty and lost, and I couldn't work out why. So I went back 3 times over the course of the next 36 hours I was in the city. Each time I tried to pinpoint the hold over me. When I was not stood gazing at it, I was thinking about it. Wandering around the city, I passed stores festooned with all manner of peregrino paraphernalia, from Tarta de Santiago, a special pilgrim's almond cake with a dusting of icing sugar forming the cross of St. James, to scallop shells representing the many routes that pilgrims take to reach the cathedral, and dried out gourds, a type of pumpkin that was used by medieval pilgrims to carry water or sometimes wine. They all seemed to blur together until they were nothing at all. I could no longer see them. Instead, I pictured that Botafumeiro, its curvaceous gilded chamber, hemmed in by chains. And I want you to sort of think with me now, as I started to think. What makes a pilgrimage different from an act of endurance, a walk across the entire length of Britain, a solo walk across Greenland? And to do that, I think I need to tell you a little bit about me, because that's what being a pilgrim is. It's opening up about ourselves. So I grew up in an area on the North Wales coast that the national press affectionately called Costa del Dol. Opportunities were limited. I left home under a cloud when I was 16, and at the age of 19, my mum died of cancer. And I always felt like I never managed to have that reconnection. And I think through life, through my travels perhaps, I was always trying to find my way back home. And I spent years working as a wayfarer, as an adventurer. But things, although they looked great on the surface to people, they weren't good. I couldn't build positive relationships. I found myself in abusive relationships with partners. I lost weight. I had an eating disorder. And I reached a point where I wanted to take my own life. And then I discovered this ancient network. These very many paths in Britain that are full of people and place and history. And they're for everyone, no matter what your beliefs. And they're completely free. And they saved me. And I'm not religious. I never have been. And I want to read you a little extract here now of a moment when I went back to my roots to North Wales and walked the North Wales Pilgrim Way. And I hadn't been speaking to my dad for quite a while. The sun is beginning to drop lower in the sky now, casting a salmon-coloured fringe around the edge of the tree line, like in a photograph. As I walk, a raven calls its eerie croak, and my footsteps are accompanied by a sucking reverb as the ground becomes boggy. Since I first discovered wild camping, the ability to lie down and sleep wherever you choose, I've never been concerned about walking well into nightfall and finding a bed in a ditch. Over the years, it has not only been something of a hobby I could write about, but also an act that offered salvation from any of life's challenges. Sleeping wild would in the past temporarily turn the off switch on some of the most negative thoughts. Yet since I ended my latest relationship, quit my job, and walked out on my life as I knew it, I inexplicably find myself less keen on being alone in the darkness. Instead of peace, it now provides uninterrupted silence for my inner critic to scream at me. As the last of the sun crescents over the horizon ahead, a flock of black-backed gulls swarm into the air, almost taunting me with their vast numbers as I march on, alone. I find myself on a permissive path, moving through a woodland of Norwegian spruce, most of which appears to grow ethereally in the orange dusk. A few have been overrun with ivy that seems to be holding them in an embrace, though I note some have had their crowns smothered by it and now risk weather. I look at the map and resolutely declare to no one that I will make it to Tremerkion. But as I emerge from the small, spindly copse, I enter a farmer's field where maize crops tower above me, and any path leading the way forward has been obliterated. I plough head first into the maize, getting slapped in the face by huge, thick leaves larger than my own hand. Wisps of yellow corn silk stick to my sweaty face as I become increasingly exasperated by the barriers in front of me. I feel my legs and arms getting scratched and grazed. I want to turn back many times, but something keeps pushing me onwards. I stop to check my location on the GPS on my phone and find I'm only halfway through the field. Exhausted, I begin stamping the stalks at their bases, taking out on them an anger that I didn't even know I was capable of. I swear and shout. With each vocalization, I feel slight relief until I finally reach the fence line in a style that will see me out. If my earlier definition of pilgrimage was right, that it had to be a walk defined by toughness and obstacles, then this certainly is the physical proof that this path is legitimate. The second hurdle comes quickly afterwards as I cut through a kissing gate and into a field stocked with cows. Growing up with cattle as a mainstay of any walk, I stride towards them with purpose, desperate to reduce the distance between me and my end goal. But while some of them move, one stays put, her eyes fixed on me determinedly. I start yelling, hoping my voice will convince her that I am human. She doesn't care, because a second later she runs straight at me, and to my horror the others follow. Every piece of advice I've ever had about how to deal with cows tells me that I categorically should not run. But this time, I ignore it. I run so hard and so fast towards the fence that my chest feels as though it will explode. Barbed wire stands between me and the safety of an adjacent field, and I can feel the ground reverberating behind me as the cows gain pace, coming closer and closer. Though moments before I'd felt so tired I could barely lift another limb, I suddenly find the strength to vault over it. I land with a thud into some stinging nettles, and the cows jostle to try and push through the fence into the empty field where I now stand. They are raging, some even trying to push down a telegraph pole that stands on their side of the fence, while I watch in disbelief. It feels every bit of allegorical as Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, an actual beast guarding my hope for redemption. A few minutes later, I reach the road that leads to a flyover across the A55 and Riash Hill. I'm tired and lost, but I finally find the courage to ask someone for help. I take up my phone and I call my dad. That path was a path that enabled me to begin to rebuild a relationship with my dad. And I think the special thing about pilgrim routes is that we are following in the footsteps of our ancestors. We're following in the footsteps of other people who are all desperately trying to make meaning. We're all equal. We're all doing the same distance the same way. And we open ourselves up to being vulnerable, because to be a pilgrim, as I said, is to be vulnerable. But instead of trying to hide the vulnerability like so many of us do, we run headstrong towards it. As I said, I'm not religious. I never have been. But history, I've learned, is so intertwined with religion. The streets we walk down are named after the saints. The names we give our children come from the Bible. And the schools and public holidays are all intertwined with religious connotation. And I found that by researching pilgrimages, both in books and on foot, I've managed to see how history and religion fits together in a way I understand. But I've also managed to see how my history, how my experiences have all intertwined too to make me the person that I am today. And I'm going to read you a final piece about one particular very special lady. And I like that I walked in when Tom was talking about the girls doing their pilgrimage. And I know the speakers tonight have been mainly male, but I'd like to tell you that on the pilgrimage path I've just walked, it was a lot of solo females, funnily enough. It was the Camino Portuguese, but I think it should have been called the Pilgrimage Senhora. It would have made a lot of sense. But yes, so doing these pilgrim paths helped me realize something had to change. I could see clearly down the path I now seemed to be treading, and I didn't want to walk it anymore. I needed a strong woman to follow. That's when I found Hilda. Born amid the throes of civil wars following the collapse of the Roman Empire in Britain, this 7th century saint lost her father as a young child and went to live with her great-uncle, a king in what was then Northumbria. She was exposed to religion at the age of 13 when he had his entire family baptized. Little is known about her life, but I like to think that's because she took those years to live a little. At the time Hilda took her vows, the two main religions were Roman and Celtic Christianity. Though baptized in the former, she seemed to embrace the latter and was summoned by Aidan of Lindisfarne to come and lead a monastery as abbess in Whitby. What is known about her charge, called Strenshall, is that unlike others, it was a co-ed abbey where nuns and monks lived and worshipped together. Hilda famously declared, despite her privileged roots, that no one was rich, none poor, for they had all things in common. During her time there, she became celebrated for her ability to bring out the best in others. Under her tutelage, 5 monks went on to become bishops, and one, Caedmon, became the first named English poet. It was said that Hilda had inspired him to find his voice. The final fact I read about Hilda, sometimes referred to as Hild, meaning battle, was that she was said to have purged the land of all snakes, which she turned to stone. Those snakes are always shown in effigies and icons of her, though a closer inspection reveals them to be ammonites, the extinct carnivorous shelled cephalopods, or mollusks, and whose closest living relatives today are squids and cuttlefish. Now, as would have been possible back then, a walk along this Yorkshire coastline, often marketed by the tourist board as the Dinosaur Coast, reveals hundreds of examples of these ancient creatures, and there are tales of local artisans who would collect them from the beach and carve on them snakes' heads to sell to pilgrims in time gone by. She even gave one genus of these ancient creatures their scientific name, Hildoceras. I love the way that in this legend, natural history had merged seamlessly with religious belief, and the thought of following in the footsteps of a woman determined to rid our lives of sneaky and deceitful serpents seemed pretty apt. And so, to my most recent pilgrimage, heading back on the Camino de Santiago after all I've done. And I have to say, what I've realized is that to be able to walk a new path, you have to first retread some old ground. Once more on a pilgrimage, like I found so many times before, I met people who all were trying to find meaning of situations they found themselves in. A woman who'd had a breakup and had 2 children to now raise on her own. A man who, crying, told me that his sister had died, leaving 2 children behind, and he was doing this walk for her. And yes, another woman who was lonely and wanted to find like-minded souls. For me, it couldn't have been a more different pilgrimage to Santiago than my first one. That first one that I read about where everything just seemed wrong with my life. When I arrived this time, instead of rain, I had sunshine, actual sunshine in Santiago. I was there with a friend. I had joy and a recognition for how far I'd come. Because one thing I've realized through walking all these pilgrim paths in Britain and through doing my adventures is that life is one big pilgrimage, one where we never stop learning, and one where the path never stops winding. Yet the destination is the same for all of us, no matter where we started out. And in the theme of learning something new, I learned something on this pilgrimage in Santiago just this morning, several hours earlier. And if you've ever seen pictures of the Santiago de Compostela, the cathedral, there's a square out front, as most of us believe it is, where all the pilgrims arrive. It's the mileage zero for the Camino de Santiago. And it's in front of the Portico Gloria. And a lady told me today that even though that is the end, that actually, and we think that's where you go into the church, it's not. That actually was the back door, or is the back door of the cathedral. The front door is round the other side, and the pilgrims would go in there. And now when you look outside the Portico Gloria, there's a town hall, but that wasn't there. And you could just see from the top of the hill, this was the spot where the sun went down. So actually, when those doors would open for the pilgrims, it would be the beginning, not the end. It would be the beginning of their new life. And I find there's something so hopeful in that no matter where our own personal pilgrimage take us or have taken us so far, There's always a door that will eventually open and we can begin again. Thank you all from one Wayfarer to another.
Thank you, Phoebe, and thanks for just sharing so openly about everything you've been going through. And also, thanks for acknowledging that you were the only woman on the panel, and because of illness. But if you also noticed, everyone was white, and I think we're going to move forward as the British Pilgrimage Trust to work with people maybe of all kinds, all backgrounds, and particularly people who maybe can't maybe never been in the countryside before. We're really going to work on that into the future. I'm going to sing a couple of songs now. One which is to welcome in the mother, the great mother that Rupert referred to earlier. In this case, she's in the form of Virgin Mary. And St. Godric was a hermit. He'd been a pirate for the first 40 years of his life. Then for the second 60 years after that, he was a hermit near Durham. And one night in a dream incubation, the Virgin Mary came to him and sang him this song. And it became the first song that's ever been recorded with words and music in England. So it's our oldest song, really, that we know of written down, and it's from 1160 in Old English. And then I'm going to finish with a folk song to rouse us to action that was adapted by folk singer Sam Lee. 2 songs. Sancte Maria, Virgine, Moder Jesu Christus, Nazarene, on foe, shield, help in God rich, on fanger, bring herice with therein Godes riche. Sancte Maria, Christus born, Mairenes clement, moderus flor, diliem in sinne, rixin min mod, bring me to winne, with therein self-ego. Awake, awake, sweet England, now awake, unto the land of Eden, and let us all partake, for our future now is calling, all in a sky so clear. So resound, resound, sweet England, for our history's always near. Let us sing this living story. Let us sing. So thank you to all the speakers. They come and they give their time and their expertise and everything and their experience for free and just as a donation to us. And it's so wonderful. It's so kind. And so thank you very much. We're very grateful. Okay, well, I think we can chat a bit and then until we get kicked out.